and that conversation really starts with the progressive era. Our outline is here. We'll talk about grassroots progressivism, a term that I'll talk about in a moment. We'll talk about Teddy. We'll talk about Taft. We'll talk about the election of 1912 and the Republican Party split. We're going to save Wilson's presidency and the legacy largely for Wednesday. But I'll talk about the election that gives us Wilson and kind of the legacy stuff if we have time at the very end of today. But we're really going to focus on this and up. So the first word I want you to take 30 seconds to talk about with your partner. It's an important word for today. Grassroots progressivism. That's a good political science word. It's a good government politics word. Take 30 seconds to talk to your partner. What does it mean? What is grassroots progressivism and why are we talking about it today? 30 seconds, go. Go, go, go. All right. So this question, this term kind of helps us get our minds around what's going to happen today. Brenda, what do you think grassroots progressivism is? Because it's a word we still use for like political campaigns, activism today. That's okay, because it's a foreign concept. Take a shot. Ooh, you said foundation. I like that. Where'd you go with the word foundation from? Because grass grows where? In the park. Sometimes. Grass does grow in the park. Thank you, Josue. Call you Luis. Good. What?
So grassroots is basically a foundation that gives, like, how do you say it, like the door and opening to like other foundations to come up.
You don't have foundations.
It's like one. No, okay, so it's one foundation.
It's like, are you talking about like Transformers?
No. It gives like basically, like it leads to the come up of new like.
Question: where does grass grow? From where to where?
Bottom up.
Bottom up. From the ground up, right? We don't see grass growing on the ceiling, I hope. But if there is, it's called mold. It's not good. We don't see grass growing on walls. That would be weird. But grass grows from the ground up. Yeah, good boy. So the idea of grassroots progressivism is just bottom-up movements. Everyday people working for progress. And we'll talk about how that looks. A lot of this is going to actually look kind of familiar from period 6, which is good. Good. So a lot of this grassroots progressivism is from the bottom up. Everyday people up. Who are they moving up towards? Who's at the top? No? Government. Right? Not necessarily. Now, top down progressivism is government policies trying to fix problems. So ideally, these two things are going to work together to address what's in the middle, which is all those problems you guys identified. You need both, right? You need grassroots progressivism to bring awareness to problems, but you need government responses to bring solutions. Pretty good. So keep this in mind, because we're going to start with grassroots, and then we'll get into government policies about the grassroots progressivism, what the government does to solve it. So what is this idea of progressivism? What's the first word that stands out in that word, Chavez? Progress. What does progress mean, Chavez? Growth. Not necessarily just growth. Not necessarily just change. Positive growth. Improvements. Positive evolution. Right? Because people could grow and it could be bad. Right? People could change, it could be bad. A lot of the problems are from bad growth. Businesses growing too much. Cities growing too much. Money growing too much. So it's not just growth, it's positive growth. It's positive change. It's improvement. It's a step forward as a society. So progressives are going to do, progressivism is going to try to address all of these problems that the Gilded Age created. Now what's worth noting is the progressives in this case are not a political party. They're not a unified movement. They're not coming together and having meetings about progress. Right? There's a lot of different kinds of progressivism, right? Like maybe all four of these dudes, they're not, let's be honest, but all four of these dudes are progressives. Right? He might be working to address African-American civil rights. He might be working, he's not going to, but he might be working to address women's rights. He might be working to address urban living conditions. He might be working to address urban politics and political machine corruption. All four of them are considered progressives, but they're not going to come in and have a meeting together and be like, all right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to do this and that, ready, break. Because progressivism is a broad umbrella of an idea that addresses a bunch of different changes. The best comparison I can give you is the Second Great Awakening reform movements. There's a bunch of reform movements. They're not one unified movement. We just call them reform movements as a whole. So very similarly to that, right, it wasn't like the Transcendentalists and the utopian communities and the temperance advocates and the women's rights workers and the abolitionists all sent one representative to go meet at the reform movement's convention. Instead, there's just a bunch of movements that are inspired by a shared goal of change. Like here, there are a bunch of movements that are inspired by a shared goal of progress that are then working to do their thing, to address the problems of the Gilded Age. So progressive reforms are going to include a bunch of stuff. Prostitution, poverty, kids working in factories, worker safety, women's rights, temperance, political corruption, political machines, with an eye towards fixing problems towards progress. Right? Good synthesis. A good comparison is the Second Great Awakening reform movements, the antebellum reform movements. Great comparison. There's a reason that I call this the Third Great Awakening. Because in a similar way to the Market Revolution causing those reform movements, here we have the Industrial Revolution causing these reform movements. So good comparison. Also worth noting, they are not a political party. On your Venn diagram from your homework, I had you compare the populists and the progressives. A big difference is the populists are a political party. The progressives are a movement. Big difference. Progressives have Democrats that are amongst their people. There are progressive Democrats, progressive Republicans, progressive socialists. Because if you care about this issue, for example, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you might work to progress it, to change it, to evolve it. If you care about alcohol abuse, you might not be a Democrat or Republican, and you're working to change a problem. So it's different from a political party, which is a very much more organized group that's working for specific change, because this is broader. And it's important that there's layers to this reform, and we'll look at all three today. Right? There's some reform that deals with local problems, like political machines is a local problem. There's some reform that deals with statewide problems. There's some reform that's going to focus on national problems. But much like today, how many of you guys think there's problems in the world today? Yeah, good. Luis's life is perfect, I forgot. But so much of the time, even today, 2019 America, we focus our attention at the top. We look at like national government problems. We blame the president. We blame Congress. We blame this stuff. Not realizing there's a bunch of problems right here that we might be able to adequately deal with. And instead, we focus all of our attention at the top. So the progressive era is going to see some local reform we'll look at, some state reform we'll look at, some national reform we'll spend more time on. Now, some of you guys ask me like all the time, when did the market revolution start? When did abolition start? You ask me for start dates on movements all the time. And I tell you, every single time, you can't really put a start date on a movement. You can put a start date on an event, like the Civil War started when, blank, Fort Sumter, South Carolina, etc. But you can't put a start date on a movement. In this case, though, I'll kind of give you some parameters. A good place to start the progressive era is the Panic of 1893. Because the Panic of 1893, when everybody gets so broke so quick, exposes a bunch of flaws in our system. Economic flaws, political flaws, social flaws. And because it exposes those flaws, because it exposes those flaws, the progressives work to start mending those flaws, fixing those problems, finding solutions. A good end date for this, some argue that it ends when the U.S. gets in World War I. I think that's a flawed end date. I think a more appropriate end date is the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Because women are working so strongly in this progressive era, as usual, giving them what the big thing they were asking for in the movement, what they asked for, I think is a good place to end. And that happens in 1920. Either way, it's about 25 good years, 27, 25 to 27, how you want to measure it, of aggressive attempts to fix society's problems. Why does it end? For the most part, it ends because the things they were asking for got done. They were asking for direct election of senators, check. They were asking for women's suffrage, check. Sometimes movements stop because you're successful. They out-success their own movement to an extent. So let's talk some themes that I want you to be aware of for all of them. The first one being incredibly important. The big progressive theme that's going to tie all this together is this: optimism. The belief that the problems that are in society are fixable. That we can fix the issues that are in front of us in a 3-step process that you're going to see repeated a bunch of times. Step 1, investigate. Figure out, what is the problem? Where is the problem? How is the problem? Why is the problem? What is the problem? And once we've figured out, identified the problem, educate. If we educate the public that the problem exists, then the public can help work to mobilize public opinion towards fixing that problem. Third step, once the public cares, then we legislate. Then we pass a law that in theory would solve that problem. Okay? Figure out what the problem is, research the problem, expose the problem to the world around you, and then pass a law that addresses said problem. What's the key player in this conversation, though? Yeah, the whole equation. Government. Government. There's this belief in this scenario that if we use more government, the government's laws can solve society's problems. Which I think is intriguing. Second big theme is the social gospel. That's why last unit in the Gilded Age, I compared the social gospel to the Third Great Awakening. The social gospel that believes for Christians that we should be working to end poverty, end discrimination, end inequality. An important piece of this is like Jane Addams, the Hull House, settlement houses working to solve these problems. A lot of period 6 is in the roots of today. But third is also very important. Third is the AntiSocial Darwinism. This piece argues, the progressives argue that if we change people's environments, we can change their outcomes. If we change people's settings, if we change what's around them, we can improve what they can accomplish in life. This is a deeply held belief of mine. That's one of the reasons I got into education, because I think that if you change people's contexts, you can change what they're capable of. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Are we all born smart, average, or dumb? Or are we a product of our environment and we come out the way we come out? What do you guys think? What do we think? What do we think?
Wait, so you're just saying nature, you're born with it?
I am saying nature, but you think you're born with it? You're born like you are, Chavez? Explains a lot.
I think it's a light environment. I mean, there's people in the same environment as me and they're not doing as well as me.
So it is fair. What do you think, Rubia?
I respectfully disagree. I think it is based on your environment because, again, not everybody lives the same type of life as you do, or not everybody has the same home life or, I guess, same habits. So I think
There's so many environments.
There's so many environments that every person adjusts in their own way, depending on what they're learning or how they're learning, or their own capabilities in a sense.
Sure. It's both, anyways.
It's part of the environment, but I believe that every person, depending on their actions and how they choose to take in their environment, it's up to them basically.
Moral of the story, it's up to a lot of things, but social Darwinism says leave everybody alone. Their outcomes are their outcomes. Progressivism makes a more aggressive approach and says, like, hey, if we address problems, people can be more successful. Reasonable argument. There's also this desire through progressivism to humanize these problems, right? If we can just not think about these problems as other humans, we can ignore them, right? So, for example, I look at like Jacob Riis, How the Other Half Lives, and his photographs of these poor people and his stories of these people living in slums. That adds a human element to these people, and now people care more. Reasonable. And big picture, they're going to look to the government to solve their problems. If we can get the government to pass more laws, if we can get the government to get more aggressive, if we can get the government to get more involved, then our problems can be solved. And as usual, it's led by educated middle-class, quote-unquote, experts, largely women, who are looking for rational solutions, practical solutions. When a lot of you guys had questions about the idea of pragmatism from your chapter on the Gilded Age and urbanization, this is pragmatism. Looking to logic to find a solution to an existing problem. Another big difference, unlike the populists who are very regional, where's the populist big region? Where do they? No, that's you put that in your DBQ and it was fully wrong. The West. Yeah, the populists address Western farmer frontier problems. The progressives are going to envelop the entire nation. So I want you to take a minute and focus first on this piece. Give me another example of somebody attempting to investigate, educate, and legislate in American history. Another example of this that we've discussed in American society that maybe does this, that does this, not with industry and urbanization, but humanize. Take a minute to talk about it. What are other examples of optimism and belief in progress and humanizing problems? Take a minute, go for it. Go, 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 go. We haven't covered that yet. Answer the question.
Real quick.
Fine, here.
Support
What?
on the government.
Yeah, but you Why don't you ask for support, but you don't have Chocobo?
Yeah.
What's another example in our history of this and this taking place? There's a couple of easy examples. Easy dubs. You got it? You can think you got this? All right, so let me stop you there. Who has a guess of somebody, another example in American history of belief in progress, of investigating, educating, legislating, humanizing problems? I can think of one really good example. In first period, you got it like this, and you guys are always quick in the first period. What's going on? Thoughts on government? No, stop that. Talk to me. Your hands up first.
I was saying earlier maybe about like when they wanted to civilize the natives in the, what are they called, the
Reservation?
yeah.
Helen Hunt Jackson's a decent example. We've been abusing the heck out of these natives. Oh, you're not going home?
Nope.
Sadly, I'm so sorry I have to be here in my class.
Oh, no, not this class. This
Oh.
school.
Okay. Even better. What's another guess? Helen Hunt Jackson's a good example. Humanizing natives in order to treat them better, but then it ends up in the Dawes Act, and that sucks. Ruby, any guesses? Too broad. Kat, any guesses? Eliam, any guesses? Closer. B-Rat, any guesses? Nothing. You're right. Uncle Tom's Cabin. Think about Uncle Tom's Cabin is trying to investigate the problems of slavery, educate America about slavery. It humanizes the slaves. We can't ignore them as oh, it's just slavery there. So yeah, this idea is not new in American history. It's not new in American society and politics of trying to draw attention to problems, humanize problems. Because if you're worried about the working poor but you can't picture them, are you really worried about the working poor? If you're worried about people living in tenement houses but you can't see them, are you really worried about it? What's up? All right, so let's talk problems and solutions. Let's talk problems and solutions. Social problems are largely around like living conditions and livability of your existence. Urban poverty, urban housing is terrible. In urban areas, there's much more rampant alcohol abuse with industrial workers. Kids are working in factories. Work conditions suck. A lot of these problems are largely urban. Urban city problems. Where do all these problems come from? Guys, be more specific. Be more specific. The Gilded Age. Right, because industrialism happens for a lot. That's a broader thing. These are all Gilded Age problems. Agree? Disagree? Now, the progressive solutions are going to involve, again, settlement houses. Give these poor people a better place to live. Remove the idea of political machines from the equation. Give them support. But also, look, exposure. Expose, educate, legislate. Expose the problem. Jacob Riis, How Half Lives. Use pictures, use stories. Make America feel sympathy for these people, and then we'll solve the problem. But then other solutions are more logical and straightforward. Let's prohibit alcohol, because that'll solve it. Let's pass child labor laws, so kids can't work in factories. Let's pass working condition rules, 10-hour workdays, to ensure that people are able to access progress in their social lives and deal with some of these problems. So what do all these need? There'll be a theme for all of this. Yeah, government. All right, we need more government involvement. The government's going to have to grow to solve these problems. Economically speaking, the problems are pretty straightforward. Monopolies are a problem. The rich being super, super, super rich and the poor being really, really poor, that's a problem. Income inequality, the widening gap, is a problem. The gap's just getting bigger. That's a problem. But arguably the biggest problem is that we have this super interconnected nature right now, where the more money you have, the more political influence you have. That's a problem. But again, the solution relies on the government to fix the problems. Remember the awesome quote from our labor union day, that labor wants to be the counterweight to capitalism, but cannot, only the government can do that? Here we are asking the government to do that. We're asking for more government control of businesses, like railroads, that the populace were asking for. Government, step in, regulate, legislate, pass laws that break up monopolies, pass laws that benefit labor unions. We try this for the first time in the Gilded Age with the Sherman Antitrust Act. It's not that successful. We'll try it again in the Progressive era with the Clayton Antitrust Act and be much more successful. Keep in mind that trust is another word for monopoly for the most part, right? A group of companies formed together to create a monopoly-type condition. So we're trying, the government's trying slowly to get involved and start regulating things that they have not yet before regulated. Again, but the theme being more government involvement. Your question was, how does the role of government change? Here's a good example. And then politically. You guys did a good job identifying the political problems. Political machines are a problem because they corrupt the political process. This trading of votes for favors, trading of votes for resources, that's not democratic. That's not the way democracy is supposed to work. That gives us corrupt legislatures at the state level, at the national level. The cartoon, the bosses of the Senate that you guys had in your DBQ, that argues that it's the monopolists that are controlling the political system, not the people. That's a problem. But big enough picture problem, our democracy is not democratic enough. Our government is not truly reflecting the will of the people. It's reflecting the will of big business. It's reflecting the will of the rich. And that's not democracy. That's not democracy. So the political solution is just to increase the level of democracy in our democracy. Make our democracy more democratic. Make our democracy less corrupt. More reflective of the will of the actual people that are voting. And to do so, you gotta get rid of political machines, get rid of economic influence in the Senate, get rid of all these things that have corrupted the process with things like, this is all you're reading, I'm not gonna go over all of them, but things like, Eliot pointed them out, referendum, recall, initiative. The idea that if we don't like a politician, we can vote him out of office. California did this moderately recently, probably before you guys were old enough to pay attention, but California elected a governor. His name was Gray Davis. First of all, never just a man whose first name is a color. Gray, yeah, not Greg, Gray.
Miss Gray?
Yeah, Gray Davis, G-R-A-Y. Yeah, yeah,
Miss Gray.
Yep, Miss Gray, exactly. That's actually her last name, though, so nice try. So, Gray Davis, we elected him. Before the idea of recall, once you elect somebody, they're kind of stuck there for the rest of their term, unless you kill them. Ask James Garfield. But in this case, California voted to remove him from office. That's a recall. That's a really democratic process. We don't like this guy, kick him out. That's power to the people. Who do we replace him with? Arnold freaking Schwarzenegger. Yeah, for a short time, California's governor was Arnold Schwarzenegger, because somehow we thought that was a better option for governor than Gray freaking Davis.
Yeah, I know.
So, but across the board, like this is on your vocab, so everybody knows it except Noe. And these ideas are important because they're going to increase the level of involvement an everyday person can have with the government. That's big. Ideas like initiatives, that we can all sign a petition and make a law without using the government. We can pass new laws by just popular demand, not relying on Congress to do it for us. We introduced the ideas of secret ballots. You don't have to vote in public, right? Which removes kind of the power of the political machine. You don't have to go in public, like, all right, I vote for January. Right? Now that we're actually going and write your ballot in secret, give women the right to vote, just expand the ideas of democracy. Now turning your page, where this comes from grassroots-wise is journalists. You guys read about them, but these super important muckraking journalists. They get their title from President Teddy Roosevelt when he takes office. We'll talk about that a little bit. But he's like, you guys are always down there in the muck, raking up all the problems. He said it positively. He's like, you're the one down in the problems of society, exposing this problem, exposing that problem. You journalists are the ones that are telling us all these problems that society has, that society would like to keep secret. Muckraking journalists. Now, their only goal is to draw attention. Go back to the theme slide. They're trying to identify the problem and educate the public about the problem that exists. Things like urban poverty. Jacob Riis, how the other half lives. That's exactly what he does. Corruption, big business practices, monopolies, scandals. Their job is to expose to society problems. Now, as you guys should know, America, throughout its history, has been a very literate country. We read a lot. So this is a good avenue to get to people. Right? A good equivalent today is like, you guys, your generation spends a ton of time on social media. You don't read as much, but you watch a lot of dumb videos. All right, that's why for the first time in generations, we're seeing a generation like reading ability dip. Y'all are actually, for the first time in American history, dumber than your previous generation. Nicely done. Good work. All right, because you don't read, you just stare at YouTube things all day and Snapchat. It's all sorts of terrible. So we're using magazines like McClure's, magazines like Collier's, and they're hiring not just people to write cool stories, people to create investigative journalism. Investigate, educate, legislate. But step one of that whole process is investigate. Identify problems and then tell people the problems exist. The best example of that is Jacob Riis. Here's period 6 again. He writes that's the first ever. That's why How the Other Half Lives is a big deal. It's the first ever expose. A piece published in newspapers, in books, in journals, in magazines of the day. And How the Other Half Lives was an expose of urban poverty, urban slums, which really set the precedent for investigative journalism throughout the Progressive era. Other ones you probably have heard of. The first is Henry George. You read that last unit too. Progress in Poverty, trying to expose, that's the first step, expose to the rest of the world this huge and growing gap between rich and poor. Lincoln Steffens writes a super important book, I'd know if I were you, titled Shame of the Cities. Knowing from the title, what do you guys think that exposed? Shame of the cities. What is the shame of the cities? No. Political machines. Right? In these cities, it's political machines that are solving all these problems. His book focuses on Philadelphia, but he makes it a point to argue that this happens in every other big city in America. And now people are like, damn, this is happening in these cities? Ida Tarbell is another great example for publishing The History of Standard Oil, which I told you in A-Push the titles are always very accurate. The book is about the history of Standard Oil. She picked a good title. But she, as a young girl, watched her father go out of business by Rockefeller's corrupt practices and horizontal integration and buying out competitors. So she watched him try to fight Rockefeller and lose to the point where their family lost everything, so she makes it her life work to expose to the rest of the world what Rockefeller's actually doing to create this power. Yeah. But all this is they're exposing from how the other half lives on. They're exposing problems in society so that we can investigate, educate, and then ideally legislate, pass new laws. Good. So one of the best examples of this is The Jungle. The Jungle is fantastic. It's written by a man named Upton Sinclair. He's now the 5th of these muckraking journalists, and I'd ask you to know Jacob Riis, Henry George, Lincoln Steffens, Ida Tarbell, Upton Sinclair. And he publishes this about the meat packing industry in Chicago. He writes this from the perspective of a worker in these meatpacking industries in Chicago, because he is one, his whole family works in these factories. And he's trying to make America feel sympathetic towards the working conditions. As you read, you'll notice he does something a little different. So I'm going to have you read it and answer for me. It's a phenomenal piece of text. The whole book is great. If anyone wants to read it, I'll happily get you a copy. But tell me, what are the problems that he's highlighting and what reaction might this bring in society? Hope you didn't have any meat for breakfast. 4 minutes. Go for it. 4 minutes. Or pre-breakfast. Or post-breakfast, pre-brunch snack. You're good by then. All right. 4 minutes, you're reading. And I look forward to your facial expressions. Reading. It is disgusting. It gets worse. Up? No, next week. I have my meeting today. Go over practice test questions. Talk about why they're right, why they're wrong. And why is it supposed to waste mouth water? Ooh, most stuff doesn't want to ground up. Luis, don't turn around. Read. Cool. You let him read. We distract him and I like that. There's more. Stop it. Did I put you in a bubble? Bubble wraps?
Alright, I'll stop.
1 minute left. You need to answer the question. You go throw up. It's how Noah's kitchen is, that's why. But did you die? Don't explain yourself, just be sorry and shut up. Alright.
Something stupid. I shouldn't be laughing.
I'm absolutely shocked. Something stupid made you laugh. I shouldn't be laughing, alright? Alright. Take a second, talk to your partner. What are these problems that he has identified? And who do you feel sorry in this story? Who do you feel sorry for in the story? Talk about it. Take a minute, go. You guys enjoy your chicken parmesan for lunch today? That's right. I agree. You're still a little bit diabetic, you're alright? Does that apply to dead rats? Or 5 years? This rat's been dead less than 5 years? Extra protein. It does have flavor. Alright, look at you guys there.
Extra spiciness.
So, imagine for one second, close your eyes. Close your eyes and imagine running your hand over a pile of meat and just feeling a pile of rat shit. And just realizing, like, And then when the lights come on, you realize the meat is moldy.
Oh.
But at least it's covered in rat. Oh wait, that doesn't help. But if you inject it with some chemicals, the color of the mold looks like meat, and then you're good to go. But then you're like, well, the big problem is not that the meat is moldy or that it's old European meat or that it's been here for a long time. The big problem is this nasty sewage water that's dripping from the roof, A. And the second big problem is the rats. But if we can kill the rats, problem solved. I have a solution for you. Put out some poisoned bread. And now the rats eat the poisoned bread, the rats die, and now we have our nice new pile of meat. Except these workers don't want to like separate the dead rats, so let's just all put it together into a nice, big, delicious sausage. Who doesn't want to eat a nice mix of sausage with rats? With rats? With rat, you know what? And also poison bread. Sounds delicious. Oh, and also those chemicals they put in to make sure that it wasn't looking moldy in the first place. Best part is the last line, which I'm sure you stopped paying attention to. This is no fairy story, no joke. The meat will be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that would enter the sausage in comparison with which a poisoned rat was just a tidbit. Moral of the story, they didn't care because the poisoned rat was the least of their worries what was going into the meat. This whole scenario is like, oh, that's just light work. What's a little bit of rat, poison bread? Because there's other stuff going into the meat that's way more. So I had you read that, realizing that they don't even care about that as a problem because that's a minor problem compared to everything else. I truly hope each of you enjoys your chicken parm for lunch today. I truly hope the next time you have a cheeseburger, you really think about what's in that ground beef. I truly hope the next time you have a hot dog, you think about what's going in there. I truly hope the next time you have some sausage for breakfast, you really think about hoping there's no rat, no poison bread, or at the very least, no rat shit. I always wish that today when I teach about the jungle would be hamburger day outside, because I'll be outside talking about the jungle. Just ruining everybody's lunch. I know you still eat it. You right? It's free lunch. So, moral of the story, what do books like this do? Expose, right? If you read this living in the early 1900s, at least this is 113 years ago for you guys. What if you read this and you just eaten your lunch and this is what you're talking about?
I would have thrown up.
You throw up, it's too late. You already ate that poison bread, mixed with the rat, mixed with the old European moldy sausage and some chemicals. Tasty, I agree. So the jungle, America freaks out. America freaks out. So they're like, wait 1 second. I feel really bad for those immigrants in our working conditions, but I'm eating what? Oh, America loses their mind. 1906, the book is published. The exact same year, we have a huge federal investigation into the meat packing industry. The government begins inspecting these plants. We begin passing regulations, improving sanitation, and the exact same year, Congress finally does something for the first time in 50 years and passes the Meat Inspection Act of 1906. It takes zero amount of time. In the same year the book comes out, we've already passed the Meat Inspection Act. Shortly thereafter, Sam H. Adams exposes the dangers with medicine not being pure as well. People that are taking drugs in way too high of doses. People that are, you got a cold? Here's some heroin, baby. You're good to go. Yeah, you'll feel way better from your cold. Yeah, you feel way better from your cold. Life is good. But now you got a heroin problem. So, we immediately afterwards pass the Food and Drug Act, which, in tandem with the Meat Inspection Act, creates what we have in our world today, where anything you buy has ingredients on it. Anything you buy has been produced in an FDA, Food and Drug Administration, from this and this, an FDA inspected plant. Vegetables come from FDA inspected farms and packing facilities. So now when you go to the store, if you go after school today to the store and you buy ground beef, what are you getting?
Sausage.
You get ground beef. What's wrong with you? Now when you go and buy chicken, what are you getting? You're getting chicken. Now if you go buy something that's boxed or canned, what do you see on the side? All the ingredients. I know, and it's regulated, right? So the idea here is that now we finally have the government getting involved to protect people so that what they buy is actually what they think they're buying. Fun quote from Sinclair, it's on your notes. I aimed at the public's heart, and by accident, I hit it in the stomach. He wanted the public's sympathy for these poor workers. And America did not care about those workers. America had no heart. They were like, oh my God, I'm disgusted. What am I eating? We got to fix that problem. All right, so Sinclair's like, I didn't solve the problem I intended to solve, but hey, at least we got some better meat. At least we got some better meat. So another example of grassroots reform is the African-American civil rights. As you guys know, post-Reconstruction, rights fall apart for African-Americans with things like the Jim Crow laws, literacy tests, poll taxes, Plessy versus Ferguson. And there's a couple people that I want you to be aware of. But I would argue this is the biggest shortcoming of the progressive era, is lacking progress on civil rights. Ida B. Wells is the next example of a muckraking journalist who's working to expose lynching in the South. She's a journalist. She's publishing exposés in magazines and newspapers about this epidemic of lynching in the South. Largely her complaints fall on deaf ears. We already talked about Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. Du Bois attempting to push for African-American equality through the talented 10th principle of taking the top chunk of African-American society and educating the hell out of them until they can prove equality, and hoping that tears down to other elements of African-American society, whereas Booker T. Washington is much more bottom-up. Give a man a trade, give a man a skill, let him earn some self-worth as a generation, and then the next generation will be tiered up from there. Also worth noting is African-Americans formed their first example of a black activist interest group to push for political change in big numbers. And it's one of the most important organizations of the entire 20th century. And while a lot of this is unsuccessful at the time, this generation is going to lay the groundwork for the next 2, 3, 4 generations of African-Americans as we get into the civil rights movement. And the NAACP becomes vitally important to that movement much later. What does the NAACP stand for?
National African-American.
That's what every year I've taught this, that's always the guess. Because you see AA and you think African-American.
Colored people.
National Association for Advancement of Colored People. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Luis.
I remember you said that.
And now the NAACP works to advocate for all groups of racially marginalized groups. And it's a super important, over 100-year-old group that to this day is working to advocate for marginalized racial groups. So you were. You've come a long way. I beat it out of you last year. Yeah, you did. So if there was a prompt about the successes of the progressive era, you can use this as a counterpoint. Right? That although unsuccessful in pushing for African-American progress, the progressive era was successful in this and that. Right? This is the one area that there's not a ton of progress being made. Now, I want to talk about local level and then state level very quickly before I get into some of the top-down approaches. But who has been solving local problems in the last 20 years? Political machines, right? This idea of, oh, you need a job, oh, you need some schooling, oh, you need some food, maybe some sleep, maybe some vocab words. Whatever it is you need, it's the political machine that steps in and solves that problem for you. What does the political machine ask in return? Votes. Yeah. So what a lot of cities are doing is they're going to start solving those problems for people without involving the trading of votes, which is going to re-democratize the local political process. Building parks, building playgrounds, fixing sanitation services, providing jobs, providing education, providing resources for people so that they don't have to rely on political machines. And once you're not relying on a political machine, then you don't need to vote the way they tell you to vote. So we see cities getting involved in making their local democracy more democratic because of Lincoln Steffens. Shame of the Cities, that very important book which exposes the political corruption of political machines in a way that makes cities want to clean up their act. Two great examples I can give you. I didn't want to go over the all 186,000 cities in America. We could if you guys really want to. No?
Yes.
No? I'll just do it. Thursday. It'll be a long Thursday. Galveston is in Texas. Dayton is in Ohio. But it's two examples of cities, bigger cities. They're both pretty big cities. Galveston's a really big city till a hurricane wipes out the whole city. That comes later though. Of cities taking steps to make their city government, their local government, more democratic. In Galveston, we see city commissioners and city councils becoming directly elected. What's the opposite of elected for jobs like this? Assigned or different A word? Appointed. If jobs are appointed, what might they be prone to? Patronage. Right? If jobs are handed out, there's always this fear of patronage at the city level. But if we pick them, electorally speaking, we're not worried about who's handing out these jobs. So these important jobs that deal with city policy, they're going to turn into elected positions, not appointed positions. So this removes, that's important, patronage, or the spoil system, civil service reform, but at the city level. Question for you guys. What got rid of patronage at the national level?
The Pendleton.
Yeah, the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. So this is an equivalent doing the same thing, just at a city level, city government level. Vice versa, in Dayton, Ohio, they begin, city managers, a very important job, especially for big cities. They begin hiring city managers instead of involving the political process at all. Like, I'm going to hire you to do this job, not because you were a Democrat or Republican, because you're going to do this job. And if he's not running for re-election, because it's a hired position, not an elected or appointed position, if he's not running for re-election, he doesn't have to piss off Democrats or Republicans, he just does his job. So again, it just makes the entire process more pure at the city level, which is an important theme in the progressive era of the change to try to make our democracy more democratic. And we can all thank Lincoln Stevens. Shame of the cities. Now at the state level, the best example is Wisconsin. Wisconsin's governor is a very progressive man by the name of Robert La Follette. And he has an idea. It's called the Wisconsin idea, because it's an idea about Wisconsin. Again, A push stays consistent. Right? These names are pretty damn to the point. He is the governor of Wisconsin, later a senator from Wisconsin, very progressive. And his philosophy is, if I have all these great progressive ideas, why don't we do it in our state first? See if it works, and then if it works, we can transfer these ideas out to the rest of the country. Right? Which is a really, really good idea. So he's a big believer in expanding education. In Wisconsin, we start to see direct primaries. So people get to pick their candidates in the first step of the process instead of the political parties picking candidates. Makes elections more democratic. We start passing increased taxes in Wisconsin. A progressive tax is a very important term for today. Who knows what progressive tax means? The populace asked for it as well.
It's like as time passes.
Kind of,
It's like
but
as time passes and you make more money, your income tax.
yeah, the more money you make, the bigger chunk you pay. Right? Which is kind of what we have in society today, progressive taxes. But in Wisconsin, we started seeing workers' compensation. People that get hurt at work getting paid because they missed work. It's not their fault they got hurt. We started seeing insurance plans, regulations on businesses, child labor laws. All of the cool stuff in the progressive era is incorporated into this Wisconsin idea from Robert La Follette. So please know him. He's an important character in this story as a key influencer of progressive policies, and him doing so in Wisconsin. Cool. And then we can talk nationally. So let's talk about the president when this era starts. What president do we leave off on?
Roosevelt.
Before him. McKinley, right? And we elect McKinley in 1896, that huge election that we ended period 6 on. Now, take a second back in time, please, with your heads. The election of 1896 was a huge event between two large forces. What two forces are at play in the election of 1896? Yeah, it's William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley. Those are the people. What are the forces, though?
Populist and
Populace is the party, not the force. That's the issue, not the big driving force of the election. What? People, workers, everyday folks against big business. The everyday people against the rich. And who won the election? The everyday people or the rich? The rich. So the rich pick William McKinley. So it seems like an odd place to start progressivism because you would assume that McKinley would be benefiting big business. Is he? Absolutely. Everything McKinley does in his first term is just what we would expect from big business in the election. A huge new tariff. Who do tariffs benefit?
The Republicans.
Yeah, big business. The Gold Standard Act, putting the U.S. back in the gold standard. Who does that benefit? The rich. The rest of us paying attention? Hilda, you alive back there? Imperialism, who does that benefit? Guys, I know it's Monday, I know it's raining, but like, I'm up here with energy. If you could stop moping around like your world is ending. This is the second Monday in a row that you guys have been dull, and it's not okay. Sorry you're sleepy, I'm sorry you're tired, but we only got 92 days until test day. Wake the hell up. Increasing imperialism, who does that benefit?
The government.
Business. Business, because now there's places to buy things, places to sell things, an increase in markets, increase in resources. A whole network of building warships, it benefits the rich. So everything McKinley does is very, very beneficial, like he should be, that's who elected him, to the rich. Now in 1900, he runs for re-election. Why does he run for re-election in 1900? Because there's an election every 4 years. That's kind of the way it works. In 1900, he's running against William Jennings Bryan again. I told you William Jennings Bryan will become the second semester Henry Clay. So he runs against William Jennings Bryan and Adlai Stevenson as his vice presidential candidate. And he picks a new vice president, Teddy Roosevelt. Now last we left off at the beginning of Teddy Roosevelt's career, he had resigned his position as Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He went to go fight in the Spanish-American War, became a war hero. He came back to the U.S., he's famous, everyone loves him, he becomes governor of New York. He's a big deal, and now he's in a quick ascendancy. He's already become vice president, or vice presidential candidate. The big issue in the election is not about the gold standard anymore, or big business anymore, it's just about imperialism. That's kind of the big issue of the election. And the economy's really good. Everything's booming. We just won a pretty popular war against the Spanish. We got a bunch of territory. Life is good. And McKinley wins a blowout election. Sorry, Jennings Bryan, you're now 0-2. 0-2. You're not Clay yet, but you're 0-2. Unfortunately, 6 months after he's elected, he's assassinated. And now who's the president? Teddy Roosevelt, who just before had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy, war hero, super popular dude, everyone loves him. Now he is president. Now the fun fact behind all of this is he, going back to political machines from last unit, where's the area that I focused most of our time on political machines on? New York. New York. Right, remember the cartoon New York versus New Jersey? And Boss Tweed is in charge of New York? Right, New York is super corrupt. And New York now has as their governor Teddy Roosevelt. Back in time 2 years. So 2 years after the war, or this is right when the war ends, I apologize. Treaty of Paris, 1898, war is over. Teddy runs for governor and he wins. Despite the fact that the established political machines in New York don't like him. Why don't they like him? Because he's reform-minded. He wants to fix things. He wants to address problems. He wants to stir up trouble. So he's now elected governor of New York, and the whole political establishment in New York's like, we don't like this. He's going to get more involved in our lives. He's going to expose our corruption. He's going to clean us up. This is a bad thing. They have this brilliant idea. They're like, what if we get him elected vice president? They're going to promote him, so to speak, to a less powerful position. So we'll pretend for a second that Josue is Teddy Roosevelt. They look kind of similar. Josue and Teddy, yes? You with me? So if we, Noe, Cortez and I, we are the New York political establishment elite. Yeah, we got our first black president, William Brent Scott McKinley over here. And the three of us are pissed because our new governor is going to get involved in our corruption, in our scandals, in our power. We don't like this idea. He's running for re-election. We got this brilliant idea. What if we got rid of this guy by making him his vice president? Whose problem does that solve? That solves our problem, yes, because now he's not in our business. Does that solve McKinley's problem? Now he's got this freaking awesome war hero everybody loves as his vice president.
Yeah.
Who loses in this situation? Nobody. But who loses in the situation when McKinley dies?
The politician.
Now, not only is was he vice president a powerless position, now he all of a sudden with one bullet is the president, and now he can get involved not just in our state's problems, but their state's problems, their state's problems, their state's problems, everybody's problems. So it's this brilliant idea to put him in a powerless position. Put him as vice president, he can't cause any trouble there. Only problem with having somebody like that as vice president is they're one bullet away from the presidency. And now, he's president. So turn your page to me, please. Oh. Now, he is going to make, and let me ask you a question, guys. What do you think? If a president dies, should the vice president who becomes president continue that president's legacy or pursue their own vision?
Their own vision.
But America picked the other guy as president. That's the vision America wanted. It's just a thought. Teddy, most previous vice presidents are going to kind of just like stay quiet and mind their own business and not try to stir up too much trouble before the next election. But Teddy's got 3.5 years because McKinley dies very quickly into his second term. So Teddy's going to give this very important, his first speech to Congress right upon being, not elected, but right upon being moved up from vice president to president. This is his speech to Congress. And it's going to demonstrate a huge change in American politics because it's going to ask for way more government involvement. All right? So I'm going to give you 7 minutes to read this speech of Teddy's and tell me what problems is he identifying in society, what does he want to do about trusts, monopolies, who has the power to regulate monopolies in his mind, what is his big proposal for his presidency now that McKinley is dead. Take 7, read it, analyze it, respond to my questions, and go from there. 7 minutes. Go. Read it. Call me a cracker?
You want me one?
It's a very important turning point speech in American history. Read it well. How does this demonstrate a change in desired governmental policy? Three and a half or so minutes left. Here we go. Big shift. I break a lot of rules, but not one that's that big. Reload. 90 seconds. I want all three questions answered. What's significant about his speech? What is he proposing? What's unique? How is this a change? Go 1 and 2. All right, take a quick minute, please, to talk to the person next to you, because there's a lot in here. All right, what is Teddy proposing to do? What is Teddy asking the government to get involved in? What are some of his identified problems in society? Teddy goes kind of in on businesses, on corporations, on trust. What is he getting at? Take a minute to talk about it. Go for it. Chat me out. Or don't. That's fine too. question I should ask you? Monday. The whole weekend ahead of us. I don't think this bad. But it's second. We're not got high standards. Yeah. Why is our presidency growing into power?
Tomorrow we have basically we're gonna cramp well, right?
Okay, let's get on to that. All right.
They should not be prohibited.
So, what are the problems he identifies in society? Cat topics. What's the problems that he points out in his introduction? Old law. What's the problem with old laws, Elio? He says we got old laws. What's the problem? Why is that a problem?
I want to say that we're not modernizing to like kind of be able to go against the big corporations and their corruption.
Good. So we have old laws, but a new, sure, society. Yeah. Old laws, new problems. Right? Old laws, old customs, old expectations can't meet our new problems. Our economy's grown too fast. Our cities have grown too fast. We have all these problems that have grown really fast, and our legal system hasn't also grown. Congress's willingness to regulate hasn't grown. What does it say about trusts, about monopolies? Brett, talk to me.
It shouldn't be prohibited, but just supervised and regulated with reasonable limits.
Supervised, regulated, reasonable limits. Does that sound new?
Yes.
Yeah. Right? This idea, like for the most part, we've left business alone with a couple pretend attempts to kind of do what business is going to do. This laissez-faire economy, Teddy's arguing against a laissez-faire economy, much more a hands-on type of economy. And what does he propose? That Congress can regulate it, but if they can't, what should they do? Yeah, add an amendment. Let's change our government to deal with these new problems that exist. You can make an argument that Teddy is our first real activist president that's willing to get involved and change things since Lincoln. Right? It's been 36 years of underwhelming presidencies, from Johnson to Grant, right, to Hayes, all the way through Grover Cleveland twice, James Garfield for a hot second, Chester Arthur, right, Benjamin Harrison, and all the way through that, McKinley. We're finally at a president who's willing to say that we need to do something different. We need to do something different. So his goals are pretty straightforward. More control, more government, more involvement. These new businesses cannot be restrained by old laws because the old laws are not sufficient. He wants to increase the power of the ICC, which was created with the Interstate Commerce Act we talked about during the Gilded Age, but really it wasn't enforceable. Having the government regulate interstate commerce more aggressively to get rid of things like railroad monopolies and the ability of transportation companies to charge whatever they want. He wants to conserve more natural resources. He acknowledges the fact that big business has been abusing our environment for a long time. Everybody else turned up. Big business has been abusing our environment for a long time, and our environment is not infinite. Our resources are finite. We should conserve them. He's a big fan of extending the merit system, continuing to get rid of patronage, get rid of spoil system, get rid of this giving of jobs to your favors, but hiring the best people for the government instead of people that you know. These are all good, progressive domestic policies. While he's doing this at home, he wants, to reference our class from last Thursday, a very strong, aggressive, enforceable foreign policy. What's his foreign policy called? No, his foreign policy.
A big long
Yeah.
stick.
Yeah, there is big stick diplomacy.
Big stick.
Big stick diplomacy. That if you have a big, strong military, you don't need to worry about what people are doing because they're going to stay in line. So his goals are backed up by what he calls a square deal. Who's heard the expression all fair and square? What's fair about squares?
They're equal. 90 degrees.
Yeah, every angle is the same.
Every
Every side is the same. So his approach is that we need to ensure that people have a fair shot. His square deal, super important. Going forward, almost every president will have a name for their domestic policies. Square deal, new freedom, New Deal, Great Society. We'll talk a lot about domestic policies that have names. He kind of sets that precedent of naming your domestic policy so that people can latch onto it. But he wants everybody, all groups, business to have a fair shake, labor to have a fair shake, farmers, consumers, everybody should have a square deal. And that the government should be there to ensure fairness. Not to ensure that one side or the other wins every time, but to ensure just that it is fair. Honesty and fairness in government, honesty and fairness in business, and that individuals, everyday people, have more economic opportunities. Because those economic opportunities aren't being all gathered up by the super rich. Now it's important that while this demonstrates change, Teddy is very moderate, very middle of the road. He doesn't like super extreme on the left side of giving all, socialism, giving all the money to the worker. He also doesn't like super extreme on the other side of leaving business alone to do everything. Right? So he's not extreme on the other side. He's right in line with these progressive, moderate, middle-class reformers. Let's find a middle ground. But even a middle ground is a huge change in American policy that for so long has been pro-business. So even a middle ground is still a significant move to the left. His square deal, naming his domestic policy, becomes the inspiration for later presidents, like FDR with his New Deal, Woodrow Wilson, who you read about tonight into Thursday, his New Freedom, Harry Truman's Fair Deal, Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society. All these policies now kind of get a presidential name because of the willingness of Teddy to brand his entire approach. Now, how many sides does a square have? 4. So, of course, his square deal has 3 sides. He's not that good at geometry. But you know what? Square deal sounds better than equilateral triangle deal. Right? So, it's not called a square deal because it's a square. That expression, I'm going to give you a square deal, is very common in the early 1900s. Right? It just means I'm going to give you a square deal, which means I'm going to be fair to you, I'm going to give you what you deserve. We're going to both feel like we won, so to speak. Right? Square deal just means fairness. So his 3 C's of the square deal, 3. If I were him, I would have picked a 4th C, just to make it all make more sense for teachers like me. But I don't think Teddy cared. First C is control corporations. To regulate irresponsible trusts. As you saw in his address to Congress, he thinks some trusts, some monopolies are fine. It's the irresponsible ones that need control. Second, protect consumers. Protect the buyers of things, the users of things, because if the consumer is not getting a fair deal, that's bad for capitalism. Things like the FDA, so we ensure that our food and drug has ingredients on them. The Meat Inspection Act, etc. And the 3rd C is conservation. Conserving our environments so that it will be here for future generations. But keeping in mind that all 3 of those things involve more what? Yeah, more government. More government involvement, more government regulation, more government hands on the world in a way that our government has never done before. Bless you. Now, one of the more lasting things he does deals with monopolies and trusts. And it's important that you don't take away from this lecture that Teddy Roosevelt is anti-monopoly. In Teddy Roosevelt's own words, Teddy Roosevelt is anti-bad monopoly, bad trust. He believes in regulating bad trust. That some trusts are beneficial to public welfare. Some are good. Some aren't abusing their consumer. Some aren't abusing competition. Some aren't just charging whatever they want. But the ones that are bad, those are the ones that need to be broken up. His legacy is that of a trust buster, because he and his government under his watch filed over 40 lawsuits against specific trusts or specific monopolies for getting in the way of competition in business. So over 40 times he's using the Attorney General of the United States, the Justice Department, to file a lawsuit under the Sherman Antitrust Act of the 1890s to try to use that law to get rid of bad trust. A good example to have in your back pocket, please, is Northern Securities versus the United States, in which case it's the first example of the federal government using legislation to get rid of a trust. In this case, it's a banking finance type of monopoly of investment groups that are taking away competition elsewhere. And the U.S. wins. They break up Northern Securities using the Sherman Antitrust Act as their justification for this lawsuit. Good to have a cartoon for you. No, God no. Not even close to top 5, but it's good. Take a minute with your partner. What is the point of view of this cartoon? What is this cartoon demonstrating about Teddy Roosevelt's presidency? What are some of the developments that put this cartoon in context? Take a minute, chat it out, go for it. What do you see, what do you know, what do you got?
He killed Patrick. My favorite teddy bear.
And Crow.
He's his brother. National equality for the good trust.
There's less regulation on the good trust. He's letting the good trust.
Why how is the president trying to do it so much?
He literally said, abolishing bad trust. He literally said,
You could just not touch it.
look, this is based upon sincere conviction that combination
All right,
of
5,
competition should not be
4,
prohibited.
3.
Supervised. It's not
Yes.
killing the bad trust, it's
2.
regulated.
No, he's killing the bad trust.
Yeah, he's not. He literally says he's not going to kill the bad trust.
With regulation.
With regulation.
All right. So, what do you see up here? What's going on in this cartoon? How does this help us better understand Teddy's presidential policies? Kelly, talk to us. Good. I like that. He's taming some businesses to control then other ones. Good. Elion, build on that. Jump, Kelly.
Well, basically, it shows. I don't know if the other teddy bears, the other bears, the other bears in the bag. But he basically is basically showing that Roosevelt is controlling good trust, and he's kind of not putting down, but regulating the trusts that aren't beneficial to the general economy.
So he's killed the bad trust, the bad monopoly, and what is that then done with the good monopoly?
Make him scared.
Yeah, the leash says restraint. This example of killing other monopolies means that monopolies that are not in trouble are going to act better because they know what happens if they get out of line. Not to mention, of course, the bear analogy. I'm sure you guys have all heard of teddy bears. Yes, they are named for Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, alright.
No, yeah, swear to God. Swear to God.
Straight from
His belief in conservation and saving the forests.
Oh,
Teddy bears are for Teddy Roosevelt.
Why are they really cute?
Yeah. Yeah, they're beautiful. Yeah. So next time, today when Luis goes home and cuddles with a teddy bear, he'll be thinking about Teddy Roosevelt. So,
Didn't he also make it illegal to cut down Christmas trees?
that's a broad
Wait, so
generalization.
what was Yogi Bear named?
So, Yogi Berra.
Yogi Bear?
Yogi Bear is named after Yogi Berra, the catcher for the Yankees in the 1930s.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
What?
Yes, for real.
What the hell is a Yogi Bear?
Yogi is a nickname.
What about Smokey Bear?
His last name was Bear.
B-E-R-A. How is that any different than anyone else?
I thought Build-A-Bear was
And Luis just killed it with Build-A-Bear.
Care Bear.
The two of them. The pink one and the blue one right here. So, next cartoon. I only put this in this slide because this is one of last year's SAQs. One of the SAQs always deals with a cartoon. This was last year's AP test. Try to answer the question. What is it dealing with?
Meat.
Oh yeah, meat.
Oh, blind investigation.
Investigation.
What is it dealing with? Consumer protection because of the jungle. Guys, that was 25 minutes ago.
That's what I said, the meat scandal.
You can be more specific. You can't say it's about the meat scandal when meat scandal's in the cartoon. It says meat scandal. Good.
Investigating the
I'm
meat
glad you've read the cartoon.
Like, that's, the
Investigative meat
rat,
scandal.
that's the bones of the rats and the dung of the rats.
What's that from?
Yeah,
Yeah, there we go. And then what's a result of this?
Oh,
The CCC.
Meat inspection.
yeah, meat inspection.
The Meat Inspection Act. Thank you.
And what comes from that? The FDA.
FDA. Good.
And
No. It's weird, I swear.
what comes from that? The 3 Cs.
So,
The second C.
No, he was literally sleeping while he was reading The Jungle.
why you gotta call him out?
Yeah, why you sleeping?
Because I didn't sleep all day today.
So you want a pony? You want a sticker? What do you want?
Yeah.
So, one event that best demonstrates Teddy's approach is the 1902 coal miners' strike. Now, what has every strike had in common up to this point, Noe?
Strike.
Every strike we've covered in this class, what does it have in common, Noe?
The common people coming together.
Good. No. No. Brett, talk to us.
It ends in favor of big business.
Every time.
Yeah.
It ends in favor of big business every time because government sides with big business.
There's no strike with rich people.
Now, in 1902, we have a strike by the United Mine Workers in Pennsylvania. It's a very important strike. Pennsylvania gets cold. They are coal miners. People use coal to fire their furnaces, to heat their homes, to heat their businesses. Winter is coming in Pennsylvania, and all these workers are on strike, and there's going to be a coal shortage. People are going to freeze to death. Now, Teddy gets involved, and he realizes that the mine owners, the ownership class, the business, is being very unruly, unwilling to negotiate, not being reasonable, and in a sense, they're just relying on the fact that business is going to always win because business wins in every strike. Now, in this case, Teddy Roosevelt instead doesn't side with either of them, but what he sides with is the people of Pennsylvania and threatens to send the army to take over the coal mine while the two sides figure their problems out. Instead of sending the army to force the workers back to work, he uses the force of the government to ensure that we can still have coal while the two sides have their negotiations. Now, in this case, this means that the business, the coal ownership is not going to make any money while these people are on strike. Whereas all this time, up to this point, every time the government gets involved, it's to force workers back to work. Now, this is a perfect example for Teddy's approach because he doesn't take either side. He takes the side of the middle ground. And now, in the meantime, he's convincing the ownership side to come to the negotiating table. This is called arbitration, in which these two dudes might be fighting about something specifically. I'm going to get involved as a third party, and I'm going to find a middle ground negotiation. So he's going to win a little bit, and he's going to win a little bit. But neither side is going to lose entirely. Whereas up to this point, every time there was a strike, labor lost entirely. So after negotiations, the workers get what they want to an extent. They get the raise they're asking for. They get the shorter hours they're asking for. But they don't get recognized as a union by the ownership class. So they get 2 out of the 3 things they wanted. Middle ground. This is helpful to understand Teddy's approach because it's not about making sure one side wins over the other. It's what's fair for everybody. This and other reasons, like legislation, is one of the reasons that Teddy Roosevelt is viewed by history as a friend of organized labor, as a friend of the working class. So this is super significant because this is the first time we have a strike where the strikers don't get anything in return. It's the first time that a strike actually results in something positive for the working class. Yes, Brett?
Oh, it's just a side question. Is FDR a descendant of him?
Mm-hmm. They're second cousins. Yeah, FDR will be related to him. which is funny because he and FDR, in general, are usually ranked in the top 4 presidencies. Usually they're both in the top 3, with Lincoln third. I completely agree with that. I think LBJ has an underrated presidency.
I had to go research on him for Serbia.
Obama's not even top 10.
No. I also don't believe in ranking presidencies until they're 20 years gone. Because it's so hard to tell what a legacy is going to be, like when some of the things they're doing still haven't really matriculated. Yeah. But this is one of the things, it's the first time we're seeing a president literally since Lincoln siding on behalf of people. That's a big change. Here's a good cartoon that comes out of it. It looks like me wrestling a Razo. But for the first time, we see the laboring class punching back at ownership. Another cartoon that comes out of it for this arbitration idea. We see Teddy lecturing the coal barons, Morgan, Bayer, Masovich, as he's teaching them how to actually properly treat your workers. But on the other side, we also see him wrestling against anarchism. So this approach is important that we see that across the board, Roosevelt's pretty down the middle, fairness-wise, not siding with either extreme. Not siding with either extreme. Another fantastic cartoon. It does look painful, right? Yeah, trying to put a belt on. That fit him in 7th grade. But we have Teddy watching as his Secretary of Commerce is actually putting the screws to the trusts to make the trusts give away more of their money. But again, it's an example of regulating the bad trusts in a way that we have not seen out of a president up to this point. Now, other significant accomplishments of his presidency, I'm going to ask you which of the 3 C's they fall under. The first is the Elkins Act, which ends rebates or favorable prices for some customers on railroads. So by ending specific benefits for some customers, which of the 3 C's does the Elkins Act fall under? Yeah, consumer protection. Now every consumer is paying a fair rate. Good, good. Second, the Hepburn Act gives the Interstate Commerce Commission more power to regulate railroad rates so that people aren't paying too much. Where would you put this one?
Control corporation.
And protect consumers. Right? It can be both, in my opinion. That by making sure that railroads aren't charging too much, you're protecting consumers, and you're also regulating the railroad monopoly. The Meat Inspection Act, we already talked about. Which one does that fall under? Yeah, consumer protection, absolutely. The Pure Food and Drug Act, same idea. And then finally, he's considered also the first conservationist president. Under him, we create 5 new natural wildernesses. And he convinces Congress to get rid of lumbering or cutting down of trees for profit on over 150 million acres of government land. So big picture, the cool thing about Teddy is that he really puts his money where his mouth is. Right? He comes into government with all these good ideas, and then he follows through on these good ideas. He sees to it that things get done in a way that no president since Lincoln has actually gotten things done. And what's crazy is he gets all this done without a war to justify it. So many of our social changes kind of happen because of wars, whereas Roosevelt really just does it because of sheer force of will. Now, from a conservation standpoint, it's important. Just a couple names for you. Gifford Pinchot. He is of the conservationist view, whereas John Muir is of the preservationist view. You guys read about this in your chapter, so I'm not going to go into too much length of it. But conservation is using the land wisely, chopping down part of a forest, not all of it, damming one river, not both of them, whereas preservationist is leave the entire environment alone. Right? John Muir, very famous preservationist, responsible, for example, for Yosemite, responsible for Sequoia National Park. A lot of our beautiful California forest land is because of John Muir. It's preserved because of John Muir. Whereas Gifford Pinchot is much more about managing and responsibly using the world. So different views. Teddy as well. But it's just good to have like these names in your back pocket. Because if you ever see a text on a test, and you see one of their names, you know it's going to deal with the environment. Right? Cool. I like this picture. This picture makes me happy.
You actually did that?
Yeah. 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 Teddy's a freaking G. It took until right now for first period to realize that he was also a knight of the museum. Have you seen that?
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it's the one that has a little monkey in it.
Sure, I've never seen it.
You never seen that?
Girl, man.
So what?
So, we only have 12 minutes left, but I want to get through Taft real quick. So take a minute with your cartoon. I think this cartoon best exemplifies Roosevelt's entire approach to progressivism. All right. So take a minute. I ask you, how does this cartoon best exemplify Roosevelt's approach? Take a minute, chat about it. What do you see up here? How does this identify with the way he approaches the world? 1 minute, go for it. Yeah. What is this cartoon getting at?
Do you know what this one says?
Which one? Pure democracy?
The one next to Robert's.
Initiative, referendum, recall. Those democratic.
He didn't need a private ship.
Yeah,
That's so they're saying that.
I'm not sure. But it seems it's kind of
All right. So what view does this take? What view does this take on Teddy's approach to progressivism? Chaley, what do you think? What view does this cartoon take on Teddy's approach to progressivism? Good. Good that he's involving a variety of perspectives to find a middle ground. You picked the perfect words. Thank you. Right? A little bit of pure democracy. Some conservatism is okay. Maybe a little bit of radical views. Initiative, referendum, recall, very progressive philosophies. And the thing that makes it all work is his speech. His ability to get people on board and make them feel like they're all in it together. And his view. The more you mix in, the easier it is to satisfy everyone. Jockey. Well done. So, he promises not to run for a third term, even though he's only elected once, because he took over right after McKinley got reelected. And he regrets that decision immediately. Legally, he could have ran as many times as he wanted. We only have this 2-term precedent because of Washington. There's no rule against it yet. But he wanted to honor Washington. He's like, I'm not going to run again. 1912's election comes. He wants to run again, but he made a promise that he wouldn't run again, so he doesn't run again. But he picks his hand-picked successor, William Howard Taft, as the Republican nominee. And it looks like Taft is going to carry on Teddy's legacy. They're all in it together. They're good friends. They seem to agree. Taft runs against William Jennings Bryan, who loses again for the third time in not a very long time. And now Taft is 0-3. And he wins. Taft wins by kind of a lot. But the problem with Taft is he feels, is his line, a little bit like a fish out of water. I hate the limelight. I hate the attention. Whereas Teddy loved the attention. Teddy was all about the people. Taft is a much more private man, much less convincing man, much less comfortable with society. And his presidency reflects that. It does. As you can see, Taft and the Republicans overwhelmingly win the North. Bryan and the Democrats overwhelmingly win the South. But since there are more people in the North, here we are. From my story from Thursday, there is William Howard Taft's actual bathtub. Yeah, they install that in. So that's why the urban legend is that he gets stuck in the bathtub. In the White House, he does not, because they put this bad boy in before he gets inaugurated. Yeah. That's it. There's 4 grown dudes in there. They got plenty of room to kick it.
So some states lost electoral votes.
Population. As Thomas is a good question. It's not about bathtubs. Go ahead.
So like over time, some states lost electoral votes.
Yeah. Electoral votes reflect population. So as people move, every 10 years there's a census, we reapportion where those votes go to represent who lives where.
What was our last census?
Every 10 years, so on the zero. So Taft, however, is not well equipped to follow Roosevelt. That's a problem. Taft doesn't trust the government to regulate big business, which is kind of the one requirement in this case, is to use the government to regulate big business. Taft is not nearly as engaging as Roosevelt. People don't like him as much as Roosevelt, so he has a hard time getting people on his side. He doesn't have the ability to do this of mixing in a bunch of views. He's too honest, he's too sincere, he's too willing to stick by his views. And every time there is a conflict, he sides with the conservative branch over the Republican side. So the Republicans are going progressive with Teddy, and then with Taft, every time there's a decision, he sides conservative, every time. That's going to split the Republican Party. The two things that split it specifically, Taft backs the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which is good for big business, not good for those progressive Republicans who want to get rid of monopolies. But keeping in mind, the Republicans are still the party of big business. Taft is just taking them back that way. Teddy tried to bring them in a new direction. It didn't work long term. He also fires Gifford Pinchot, the chief conservationist, after a controversy about selling federal lands to get lumbered on, to get trees cut down on. And it's these two things, these two events, which are going to split the Republican Party into a progressive and liberal wing. It's Taft's presidency that puts the old guard or conservative pro-business old-style Republicans against the progressive side of the Republican Party. So in a sense, what Teddy was trying to do was take the Republicans back towards Lincoln's legacy of being social activists, political activists, like the Republicans had first been founded to do. And under Taft's presidency, he puts them back where they were during the Gilded Age of pro-business. Now, Taft does break up more monopolies than Teddy does. He doesn't get a lot of credit for that. Here's a good cartoon about Taft's presidency and approach. Take a minute and look at it for me, please. For your partner, what is this cartoon trying to get at? Gifford Pinchot. All right, Jenry, what is this cartoon trying to get at about Taft's presidency, sir?
It shows that he was Roosevelt's handpicked
Successor.
But he wasn't doing what the people had hoped for. Like he was doing things that went against Roosevelt's legacy.
Good, right? Is he following in Roosevelt's footsteps? Yes, just back the way they came. So the important piece here is that this cartoon argues that Taft is ruining Roosevelt's legacy by going back on all the stuff Roosevelt had done. Who publishes this cartoon? La Follette Weekly. Robert La Follette, governor of Wisconsin, super progressive. So it should not be surprising that he's going to be very critical of Taft. So there are some setbacks, but we got to give Taft some credit where credit is due. Under him, we see some really significant progressive legislation. The first is the 16th Amendment, the national income tax. It's written, not ratified, but it's proposed under him. So is the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators. So two of these really important proposals way back from the populists of the progressive era are going to be adopted under Taft's presidency, as well as new safety codes for miners, new safety codes for railroads, better working conditions for both groups, and the removal of child labor through the Children's Bureau. So some good progressive policies. Keeping in mind that these two ideas were first proposed by who? Populists, right? These are first populist ideas that finally become true during Taft's presidency. However, come 1912, Teddy Roosevelt's mad. Teddy Roosevelt is salty. He doesn't like what Taft has done to his legacy, so he decides he wants to be president again. He's going to pull a Grover Cleveland and have a little 4-year break and come back. Unfortunately, the Republicans don't know who to side with, Taft or Roosevelt. They pick Taft. The conservatives in the Republican Party pick Taft, and Roosevelt runs anyway. he makes his own third party. It's called the Progressive Party or the Bull Moose Party. Because they're asking him, like, aren't you old? You're kind of old to be running for president. He's like, I feel as strong as a bull moose. Call him the Bull Moose Party. But by splitting the party, you ensure the other side always wins. In 1912, we have 5 main candidates: Taft, Roosevelt, Wilson. We have Eugene Debs, the socialist, and this dude who wants to run on an anti-alcohol platform.
Hello, boxers. Hello, boxers. At this time, we're going to have lunch inside our building, so we're going to have that ring.
Why don't it take so long to say
transition to your next period. That would be 5th period. So you guys can transition to your 5th period once everybody